Amateur Traveler is in its 20th year now, but can you imagine if I had people on the show who had never been to the destination but had just read about it or seen a movie about it? That wouldn't make any sense at all, and you wouldn't listen. We all know how important it is to receive advice from people who know a destination to get the most authentic local experience. And a great option for experiencing this is Explore Worldwide and their authentic small group adventures, led by local tour leaders, perfect for solo travelers who want to meet like minded people with a desire for adventure. I'm often an independent traveler, but two of my last three trips were with small group tours because they organize everything and it's a lot easier. If you want to recreate the tour I did to Malta, they have a Malta and Gozo Discovery Tour. I'm intrigued by one of their tours called A Taste of Sicily. The company again is Explore Worldwide, and visit exploreworldwide.com to learn more. And thanks to Explore Worldwide for sponsoring this episode of Amateur Traveler.
I got my bags packed, I'm on a roll. I'm heading out there and I'm ready to go. I'm looking real good in my passport photo. Oh, no.
Amateur Traveler, episode 697. Today, the Amateur Traveler talks about castles and vineyards and half-timbered houses, the Franco-Prussian War, the Rue de Vin, and storks as we go to the Alsace region of France. Welcome to the Amateur Traveler. I'm your host, Chris Christensen. I have a very important announcement for you, which is going to be that this is the last episode of the show in the iTunes enhanced version, now that the MP3 version also has chapters and photos. But first, let's talk about the Alsace. I'd like to welcome to the show Brighde Reed from worldvegantravel.com, who has come to talk to us about the Alsace. Brighde, welcome to the show.
Oh, it's a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
And I've already learned something because I think I said the Alsace was the first thing it came out of my mouth when we started talking, and I was saying it wrong. Where are we talking about? You want to put it on a map for us?
Yeah, absolutely. So the Alsace region of France is in the east of France. It shares a bit of a border with Switzerland and also Germany. So it's really in the east central part of France.
And there's some things that are unusual about this area, which we'll get into, but why should someone go to the Alsace?
First of all, France, just generally speaking, is, of course, a very, very popular destination. And one of the reasons why I think France is so appealing is that each of the regions are so different. And Alsace is particularly interesting, in my opinion, for a number of reasons. So, first of all, it's a little bit of like a cultural exception to France. And what I mean by that is it's had a huge influence from Germany over its history. And indeed, Alsace has actually been part of Germany and part of France and has flip-flopped many times over the past 100 years. And I believe that before the First World War, it was part of Germany for a while, and then it went back to France after 1918 when Germany lost the war. And then, of course, it went back to Germany during the Second World War and then went back to France after the war ended. So because of this, it has a huge amount of German influence in terms of the architecture, in terms of some of the cultural aspects. It even has its own dialect, which maybe isn't so surprising because France does actually have quite a number of dialects there. But Alsatian is actually quite similar to Swiss German, actually. And actually, a little trivia there, the use of Alsatian was actually banned in 1945. However, the reason why it was banned was because France after the war, they didn't want any German influence in the languages, I believe. And when they realized that this probably wasn't a good idea to ban a language like this, that they actually made it sort of officially able to be used again, and now it's the second largest dialect in France, although not so many people speak it now. And it really is a mixture of Old German and Old French. So there are so many reasons, but I'll just start off with that. It's very different to the rest of France.
Excellent. Well, and you mentioned that it was German at the beginning of World War I. It became German after the Franco-Prussian War in 1870. That was when it was acquired by Germany, which is shortly really after Germany becomes Germany at that point in terms of Germany becoming a country. So excellent. Well, what kind of itinerary are you going to recommend for us?
Well, I mean, Alsace is just such a fantastic destination because it's really sort of small enough that you can get a really good sense and feel of the place and see a wide range of different things in a short amount of time. So first of all, I'd love to chat about like getting there, because this has really changed in just the past few years. So the first time I went to Alsace, which was 20 years ago now, it required, I mean, we know that French trains are extremely efficient, but they didn't have any TGVs and certainly not the fast tracks until just 2016, I think it was. So it went from being able to get there in 5-6 hours from Paris to being in central Paris to Strasbourg or Mulhouse in just 2 hours. So it's really, really accessible now, not only for French people, but those people coming into France, or maybe even want to just add a little stay in Alsace if they're basing themselves in Paris. I mean, you can even come down for the day.
And is that a train that is running from the Gare de Lyon?
I believe so. Yes,
Okay.
yes, it is. So, yeah, in Alsace, there are so many wonderful things that you can do. Like I said, there's a real mixture between towns and villages and cities. First of all, Strasbourg, that is a really great place to include on your itinerary. And I can certainly talk more about what travelers can experience there. And there's beautiful towns of Colmar, which is much smaller. You also have the incredible Vosges Mountains to the west of Alsace, and then just across the border into Germany you have the Black Forest Mountain there, Black Forest Mountains, which are really beautiful. You have the wine route as well, which is a beautiful scenic road. Yeah, a scenic road where not only do you get to stop off in villages where you can taste wines, which are very scenic and beautiful, but also the countryside around there is just so stunning as well. But it's also a really good point to jump over and get 3 countries for one, so to speak, by going over to the border in Germany. There are some really lovely towns just across the border in like Baden-Baden or Karlsruhe, and also Basel in Switzerland is a really cool destination as well. So yeah, that's kind of a very brief overview.
Okay, great. Well, where are we going to start?
Well, I guess we could start in Strasbourg, if you like.
That seems like a good place to start.
Strasbourg is, I believe it's the 10th largest city in France, and it is quite an international city because the European Parliament is there. So it's full of Europeans that are living there who are involved in European politics. And not only is Strasbourg like the capital of Alsace and have this focus as being the head of the European Parliament, it's also extremely scenic. And the cathedral itself is absolutely stunning. It's widely considered to be one of the best, and it's like the second tallest cathedral in the whole of France, and it's considered to be just an incredible example of Romanesque architecture. And La Petite France, which is like a little region, a very small area in the center of Strasbourg, is actually UNESCO World Heritage, as France has so many UNESCO World Heritage sites.
Right.
But La Petite France is one of them. And that's really famous because it has some beautiful half-timbered houses and beautiful little cobbled streets. There's a little sort of canal system that runs through it, and you can take a little boat and go through the locks and get a bit of a tour there. And of course, it's particularly magical like the rest of Alsace is at Christmas time, where, of course, you have all of the Christmas markets. And there's also the Palais de Rouen, which is a beautiful building and real sort of palace kind of setup and has a lot of museums in there. So Strasbourg is a definite must-see. I would definitely recommend heading there for at least a day.
Okay.
So if you were just going to stay in the town of Strasbourg, then I think it is absolutely worthwhile, and it's something that we do when we are there, is to you can, of course, find a free walking tour, and these are very, very popular in France. We have a guide that we use, and she's absolutely fantastic. But any tour of the town is going to be so helpful because there is just so much hidden in plain view that you just would not know unless you had somebody explain it to you. And professional guides are just this incredible source of information in this area. So definitely I would recommend doing that. I would also recommend taking that boat ride on the canal, and they'll often take you as far down as the really quite interesting architecturally modern building of the European Parliament there, which is also fantastic. And they have several museums as well, like the Musée Historique of Strasbourg, and also that Palais de Rouen. It has several museums as well. And of course, the people watching, just sitting on a cafe on the street and watching the world go by, walking around at different times of day and night and seeing what's going on is just lovely.
Well, and we didn't quite position it, but we say we're right here on the German border. We're right at the Rhine River also.
Yes. The Rhine River doesn't go through Strasbourg, but it is very, very close by. And yes, it's really close to the border.
Is there a particular place that you recommend to stay, or a quarter of the city that you think is a great place to base ourselves while we're in the city?
Yeah, accommodation in Strasbourg can be a really interesting situation, actually, because most of the time, most international travelers, I think, maybe I'm sure there are some exceptions to this rule, but most people are really interested to come into Strasbourg during the Christmas period because the markets in Strasbourg and throughout Alsace are just so spectacular.
Which seems to me more of a German thing than a French thing.
Yes. Other areas of France are jumping on board of the Christmas market thing. Okay. It's good for the economy, and it brings in visitors and tourism. And of course, they are really nice. But I have been to several of those, and I don't think they are quite as nice as the Alsatian ones, in my opinion.
They've had a head start, so to be fair.
They absolutely have, yes. Accommodation in Strasbourg can be a little bit of a challenge at that time, with prices being a little bit more. And of course, it's very, very busy at the old part of the town during the markets, and potentially could be a little bit noisy as well. Whenever I've stayed in Strasbourg, I have stayed close to the station just because I've been getting on trains and things. And there are several hotels that are fairly close by. And like most of towns and cities in France, the train stations are quite centrally located, so it's easy to walk in and out. So I mean, I guess it really depends on what you want. Do you want to be close to the action but maybe have a much smaller hotel room and maybe not get so much for your money, or are you prepared to stay a little bit further out and have to travel in a little bit?
Well, years ago when I first visited Strasbourg, I've been there twice. Once on a trip where we were driving our own car and we were driving down the Rue de Vin. And that time we did what you said, and we stopped by the central train station. And this is more than 30 years ago. The only hotels we found in the area were really sad. And so we actually ended up leaving the city and staying in a nearby walled city of Mützig, which is this beautiful little town in the countryside, and then day tripped into Strasbourg in the evening. And that was very nice if you like more of a country setting than the city setting. But I'm sure things have changed a lot in terms of the hotel scene since that time. The next time I was there, I was on a boat. I was on a Rhine River cruise, so I had a place to stay. But
I have stayed in a few hotels around the station, and certainly they aren't unpleasant or divey or in any way. In fact, we stayed in some of the like Mercure brand and Accor, that kind of thing. But I was a little bit disappointed of what I got for my money. Yeah. And actually, when I go to Strasbourg, we stay outside of Strasbourg, and we find that a lot better for us.
Okay. So you still find the same as I did. Excellent. And you're right. The Grand Lille, the is just such a beautiful area. It is one of the more beautiful cities in Europe, I think, and that is a stiff competition for that. But it is a very beautiful city.
I agree.
Where to next?
Colmar is definitely a place that you can put on your itinerary. It is a town. It's about an hour by car and about half an hour by train from Strasbourg. So you can easily travel in from Strasbourg for the day. It's kind of like a smaller version of Strasbourg in terms that it has like lots of half timbered houses, and it has got a lot of canals running through it. So that sort of historic area is called La Petite Venice, like
the little
because
Venice,
of these
okay.
canals. And it's really lovely to walk around. There's not many cars around there. Of course, it has an incredible Christmas market as well that is equally magical, but it also has some really interesting architecture and some amazing museums. So for those people who are interested in art, Colmar has some really world-class museums for a relatively small town. So a couple of these are Musée unter Linden, which means the museum under the linden trees. Yes, which is a former convent that is now a stunning art museum, and it's like considered one of the best outside of Paris. And it's got works by Monet, Renoir, the Isenheim in altarpiece, and some just amazing pieces from the Gothic and Renaissance eras. So that's like slap bang in the middle of Colmar town as well. And then they've got the Bartholdi Museum, which even though I've been there several times, I haven't had the opportunity to go inside. However, I have walked around in the courtyard there. And do you know who Bartholdi was, Chris?
I am drawing a blank.
Yes. Well, it's pretty random, so I don't blame you. But he is actually the person that gave the world the Statue of Liberty.
Oh, okay. I was going to say, the name is so familiar. Why am I not coming up with this? Okay.
Right, yeah. Well, he was a sculptor. He was actually born in Colmar, and this museum, his house that he was born in, is now turned into a museum, and it contains a lot of examples of his major works, for sure. So that is definitely an interesting place to check out.
An example at scale, one would assume, of his major works.
Yes, absolutely. So sometimes he would do like a practice ahead of time before he did the big one. So you'll find some of those in there. And there's a lot of really significant buildings there as well. So it's a really good idea to do some research ahead of time, or get a tour guide, or jump on one of those free tours, because again, there's just so much hidden in plain view. You'll want to learn a little bit about this. And there are a couple of really interesting buildings. And the Maison de Tête, the House of the Heads. Yes, you speak some French. That's great. So Colmar has always been a really rich city, and there are some incredible buildings from the Renaissance period. And this building, Maison de Tête, is now a beautiful hotel, and I think it's a Michelin-starred restaurant or something like that. It was built in 1609, and the entire facade is covered with heads, 106 carved stone heads on the facades, hence the name, the House of the Heads. And I'm sure if your listeners, if they look at Google Images and just look at pictures of Colmar, they'll see just these amazing pieces of architecture that they will definitely want to have a look at and learn more about once they go there, because there are so many stories in all of these little details. So yeah, Colmar, definitely visit there.
Okay. Where to next?
The wine route. So this is a wonderful thing for any wine lovers out there, although you do not have to be a wine fan to appreciate the beauty of this lovely part of the world. So France, like many countries around the world, looking to boost tourism and get people contributing to the tourist dollar, that in 1953 they actually created the Alsace wine route. And it's 170 kilometers from the north of the region to the south of the region. And it has a wide range of activities related to wine and the vineyard going on all along it. And it's a popular touring destination. But like I said, you don't have to love wine in order to enjoy it, for sure. But one of the interesting things is it actually passes through 70 wine growing villages. And they're generally renowned for being the most beautiful villages in the Alsace and in France. Chris, I'm curious, do you know about the Les Plus Beaux Villages scheme?
Yeah, the small, beautiful villages of France. And you have to get special designation to be le plus beau village, or what is it?
Yes, the plus beau. That's a really hard one to say.
It is hard to say.
Le plus beau village de France.
Yeah, we've talked about a few of them on the show before. I think the last episode we did on the south of France, near the Canal de Midi, we talked about some of the villages there that received that designation.
Right. Yes. Oh, they're just lovely, lovely towns for sure. And as soon as you get on that list, if a village gets on that list, you're guaranteed to have lots more visitors. But this route passes through 70 villages, and some of them, like I said, are very beautiful, including Eggesheim, Kaisersberg, Ribouville, Requewihr. As you can hear, some of those village names do actually sounds very, very German, with the Heim and the Berg and the Wehr. But I have not been to all of these villages, of course, and you don't have to do the whole 170 kilometers. Of course, you can just dip into it for a day or two. But you certainly can expect a very scenic drive. And I have done the road, visited the wine route several times, and I've been most of the time in December, and it's still been really lovely. But I have been in September, and the weather was absolutely glorious. It was so glorious at that time of year. Like the harvest is going on. The leaves are starting to sort of go a little bit yellow, and it was just lovely. The tourist office says the best time to go is May to October, so any time during there is really great. We visited to taste wine. We visited the village of Dambach-la-Ville, and we visited Domaine Schäfer-Wörli, and we did a tasting of about 6 or so wines there. We specifically chose that particular winery because we were with our travelers, and we wanted to make sure that the wine was vegan wine, and their wine is vegan. So that was why we chose it. But anyone could go there. It's a really lovely winery. They're a very hospitable family. It's in this absolutely beautiful village of Dambach-la-Ville, and I definitely would recommend checking out Domaine Schäfer-Wörli.
And I have to ask you a stupid question, because I've got at least one person who's listening to you is, I don't know how a wine could not be vegan wine.
Sure.
Because it won't have animals in it.
So many people are curious about that. And I mean, it depends on, some vegans don't worry about whether a wine is vegan or not, because that's not important. But I will just tell you, a lot of people don't consider wine vegan because during the filtration process, and when they're trying to get the sediment out of the wine, a lot of the bigger wine producers, they use 2 different ways of doing it that are not vegan. One is using isinglass. Do you know what that is?
I do not know isinglass. I assume it's made in Eisenberg, but
I don't know where it's made, but it's from fish bladders.
Oh, okay.
Bizarrely. Yes. And also egg white is often used to filter the wine as well. Now, like I said, personally, as a passionate vegan speaking right here, I still don't worry about whether a wine is vegan or not, precisely because I can't look at the ingredients and tell, and it's a process. Sure. Yeah. It's not something that's really advertised much, so I can't really know. And like I said, it's not an ingredient, it's just used in the process. But of course, as you can imagine, for our travelers, we want to make sure that the wine is vegan for them. So for our travelers, we worry about that, but personally, I don't worry about that.
I get it. And one thing we'll pause here for a second. One thing I'd like to underline, when Brighde says that you don't have to be a wine lover to enjoy this route. The first time I was on this route, I was shortly out of college. So it was more than a couple of years ago. let's just say. It was a 1987, to be more specific. And we thoroughly enjoyed this portion of our trip. We spent a couple of days in this region. And I honestly don't think we went to a vineyard. I like wine now, but I don't know that I liked it quite as much at that time. And I don't remember stopping at any of the vineyards in the route and trying any wine. But what I do remember are so many of the little towns, as you mentioned, and also ruined castles, which you mentioned Eggesheim. There are 3, for instance, ruined castles up on the hill in Eggesheim. I don't think we went to that one. We went to one that I'm sure I couldn't find the name of now, because all along these hillsides are castles that are left over from the 30 Years' War that ravaged through this area and destroyed a lot of the fortifications. And so we explored castle, and we were all college graduates at this point, but I swear, as I start to remember that, I start to think of, well, how old were the kids at that point? And then I realized, oh, there were no kids with us. It was before they were born, but we behaved like children exploring these little ruined castles up here in the Rue de Vin. It was just such a fun time. And then we also went to some of the other non-ruined castles like Haute Konigsberg or the Mount Saint Hodido, the monastery or convent. I can't remember which. I think it was a convent.
Okay.
Yeah, and those are all listed on the Alsace wine route, so they're not things that were secrets at all, but that was, even if you don't drink wine, I absolutely agree, you can completely enjoy this part of the trip.
Yes, there are 2 villages that I have visited several times through our visits and our tours, and I'd love to talk about them a little bit as well. So one you've already mentioned, Eggesheim, which is quite a small village, and it's been listed as one of the most beautiful villages in France, Les plus beaux villages de France, since like 2003.
I wasn't going to say it again. Okay.
Yeah, you're very wise.
And to bring that up again, so to be listed at that, the village has to not just be pretty, but it has to have at least 2 significant aspects of it. Has to have significant culture, art, or history, as I recall.
I believe so too. I don't know the specific parts of which ones that Eggesheim and Kaisersberg put forward in their application. But you're right. They don't just give out that award willy-nilly, that's for sure. Anyway, Eggesheim, it's been awarded the National Grand Prize winner for flowers, which means there's just flowers and geraniums particularly all over the place. It's very, very even more popular because in 2013 there was a really popular show where they featured a lot of these beautiful villages, and Eggesheim was actually voted the favorite village of the French people, which I thought was really kind of cool. So anyway, Eggesheim is quite a small village. It's a former fortified village fort, I guess. And then as time went on, the residents, they built their houses against the walls, inside walls of the fort, so that they didn't have to build an extra wall, I guess. And as a result, you've got these absolutely adorable houses going around the village, and they have these very small streets in between them. They've got really small squares. They've got fountains. The atmosphere during the Christmas market, because it's still quite a small village, is really, really beautiful. It contains a castle, parts of which are from the 14th century. And my personal favorite is that there is a really cute church with stork's nest on top of it.
Which is a particular thing in this region, which we hadn't talked about,
Right, yeah. I don't know about your listeners, but I wouldn't say I study birds, but I do really, really like birds. And storks have always really captured my imagination. And Alsace has always been famous as a place where storks migrate to in the summer to have their babies. They fly thousands of kilometers from Africa, and then they work on their nest. They build their nests. They mate for life is also really interesting. And they raise their babies together and before flying back to Africa for the winter. Anyway, these storks' nests are really quite spectacular. They can weigh up to 500 kilograms. And traditionally, storks would have their nests on just the roofs or on chimneys. But as you can imagine, that can be quite disruptive, and 500 kilometers over many, many years would be a bit of a problem for the houses and the architecture. And so they've actually built these kind of metal frames on the top of houses and the top of churches to kind of encourage them to nest there, so they can nest there and actually bring good luck and prosperity to the people that live in that house. That is what the tradition is, but it's also not going to damage the house as well. And these storks' nests are quite incredible. And of course, when the storks are in there and flying in, it's really spectacular to see. In the 1980s, there were hardly any storks left in Alsace because of the dangers the storks were facing in the migration, and they were quite threatened. And Alsace has done quite a good job at making storks be able to live in Alsace. I believe they've even done some strange things as well to make it so some storks are unable to migrate, or they don't have the necessary knowledge or to be able to do the migration anymore. However, they do have these incredible storks' nests, which if you go in the springtime and you can see the babies, it's just really, really special.
Excellent.
The other village that I'd love to share is Kaisersberg. That one is a little bit bigger, in my opinion, not quite as charming as Eggersheim, but still lovely, full of half-timbered houses. Again, it has that award for one of the most beautiful villages in France, and it was actually the birthplace of Albert Schweitzer, who was a Nobel Peace Prize winner. And it's always interesting for vegetarians and vegans to go there because, of course, Albert Schweitzer was a vegetarian, and had he been alive today, I think he would have been a vegan as well. And another thing that's really unique about it, as well as the half-timbered houses, they have all of these beautiful lovely wrought iron signs on the shops, which are really, really charming. They even have trilingual road names as well. So they have 3 different versions of a street: French, Alsatian, and then the Alsatian name translated into French as a way to, I guess, keep Alsatian a little bit alive. So Kaisersberg is a really lovely place to check out as well. And again, of course, it has a Christmas market.
Of course.
Another place that I would love to recommend to your listeners is a visit to, and then again, this is something that's very hard for me to say, Chateau Haute Königsburg. Have you been there?
Yes, I have. Yeah, you get a little mixture of the languages there.
Yes. So this place is located fairly close to Colmar, and this is a really great place to go if you don't have access to a car, because there is a shuttle from the train station at Sélestat, which just costs €9, and they really, really try to push people to take this because the chateau is it's on the top of quite a big hill, and it's quite a narrow road to get up there. So of course there can be traffic jams in the peak season, so they really encourage people to take a shuttle. So it's an absolutely stunning castle. It's the only renovated castle in Alsace, and I think it was built in the Middle Ages, and it was abandoned in 1633. It was renovated just 100 years ago, and sometimes these renovations don't go so well in that people look back and was like, oh, this isn't so authentic. But actually, considering the time period when this was done, experts generally agree that they did a really good job with the restoration. It's really quite authentic, and it's been decorated in quite a rich medieval style. Certainly don't expect Renaissance palaces at all, and it's really sort of bare, like I think it was like at that time. And if you're into this kind of thing, it has an incredible collection of weapons from the 16th and 17th century. And the views from the top are just amazing. I think you're something like 600 meters above sea level. So you can sort of see along the Alsatian, the plain of Alsace, which is beautiful.
Well, and their collection of weapons didn't quite help them because it was left as a ruin after the Swedes went through in the 30 Years' War. So that, as I said, so many of the castles in this area destroyed in that time period because this was that border zone between the Holy Roman Empire and France. And so armies would just be going back and forth in one direction or the other.
One of the great things about visiting here is that you can get a bit of a sense of what it's like because it has been renovated in such a good way.
That was beautiful. And even if you didn't go inside the castle, which you should, just going up there and seeing the view, it's just a beautiful location as well. Yep.
I agree. Yeah. So like I mentioned, it's so close to the border. So you can pop into Germany for the day or for a couple of days. And on a different trip, I was lucky enough to do a 7-day hike through the West Weg, which is a hiking trail through the Black Forest, which was really, really lovely, but that might be for another time. But some places that you can certainly visit on a day trip into Germany from Alsace is there's two really lovely towns. One I know better than the other, but there's Baden-Baden and Karlsruhe. Baden-Baden is a very, very rich town, a German town, one of the richest in Germany, I believe, and it's been very famous for a couple of 100 years because it has been very good for the waters. For its as a spa, doctors would prescribe visits to Baden-Baden to make use of the water.
Well, you're actually underestimating them. The Emperor Hadrian went to Baden-Baden.
That's right.
So more than a couple 100 years.
You're right. I'm remembering now when you said that. Yeah, it's they have known about the waters for a really long time. And certainly you can go there and enjoy the spa, but also there are some incredible hotels for such a small town. They often have a lot of big government sort of delegations and conferences in Baden-Baden, which is surprising that it has so many hotels that can cater to that kind of big delegation like that. So that's really interesting. And it has a lot of opera and theatre and those kinds of things. So definitely would recommend a visit to the spa town. And also something that maybe travellers wouldn't know about is there's actually an incredible wildlife sanctuary right in the middle of the Black Forest called the Alternative Bear and Wolf Park. Now, when you hear that, you might think that it's a zoo, but actually it's not. It's a really great place to check out for all the family.
That sounds like I would find things that are other than bears and wolves, but that is not what it means.
Oh, right. So a little bit about this place. We found this place and we knew that it would be a great place to take our vegan travelers because vegans generally really, really care about animals. But this place is really for everybody. In Europe, like in many places around the world, bears they really suffer in the wild because there's a lot of human animal conflict with bears to the point where there's actually very few bears left. So sometimes bears that have basically been fed, for example, and can no longer be in the wild because they're coming into the towns to get food.
Sure.
There's only a couple of this, one or two of these examples in the bear park. They are brought into this place where they can have, although it's not complete freedom, they have this huge amount of space to play and to do bear things. And also, like in many places around the world, there's a lot of roadside zoos and circuses which are still using bears as for entertainment reasons. This is, of course, very, very upsetting for the bears. And there's quite a few bears at the park that have some residues of their time in captivity, like compulsively licking their paw until it bleeds and these kinds of things, which sounds very, very sad. But basically this place has become a sanctuary where these animals can be brought to and live the rest of their lives without being in small concrete cages. So not only do they have bears, but they also have wolves as well. again, formerly from zoos, particularly roadside zoos. And they also have a few lynx as well. And these are also from roadside zoos. And it's been really nicely designed. So you kind of are on a path. Obviously, it's all fenced. They can't get out and you can't get in. But you walk through and there's lots of informational panels. And if you have the means, you can hire a guide to take you around and explain what's the stories behind these animals, why they're there in the first place. And I think a lot of people are becoming increasingly conscious about not wanting to go to visit zoos. So this is a really great place to go. And the model for them is that they get a lot of funds, which they need to keep the sanctuary going, by charging a little bit of money for people that want to come and learn about the bears. So when you go there, you're really supporting an absolutely fantastic project. But it's hard to know about unless someone's told you about it, because it's sort of right in the middle of the Black Forest. But if you have kids, I think they would really enjoy that.
Excellent. And then you mentioned Karlsruhe.
Karlsruhe as well. I have spent just a few hours there. Really easy to access if you're staying in the south of Alsace. And it's just a really, really lovely old German town. I just walked around it and explored the Christmas market when I was there, but it was really, really lovely and definitely worth checking out. And even if you could certainly do the Bear and Wolf Park and Karlsruhe in one day, and it would be a bit shorter time in the car than doing alternative Bear and Wolf Park and Baden-Baden.
Well, and one interesting feature of Karlsruhe for people who are Americans is that Thomas Jefferson was so impressed by its design. It's this fan-shaped city design, and you can see it if you look on a map, that he sketched it out and sent sketches to Pierre Lafont, who designed Washington, D.C., because he thought it was something that he should be aware of that. And both the inventor of the bicycle, Karl Drais, and Karl Benz come from Karlsruhe.
Oh,
so two Karls from Karlsruhe. Well, we did another episode, actually, if you want to hear more about Karlsruhe and that part of the river, we have an episode on Baden-Württemberg, and that's the German state you're in when you're down in the Schwarzwald, the Black Forest, or in that particular area, Karlsruhe, all the way up to Heidelberg, for instance.
Fantastic, yeah. I'll check that one out. Be good research for next time.
Excellent. Do we have anything else we want to cover on your itinerary, or shall we start to get to some of our wrap-up questions?
Well, I would love to talk about Basel.
Please do. Please do. Although we do have another episode on Basel if people want to hear more detail.
Okay. Well, definitely go and check out that episode for more of the detail. But it's a really great place to visit when you're staying in Alsace because it's so accessible. If you're staying in Ensisheim, which is where we stay when we are there, then it's just a 30-minute drive from Ensisheim. Or from a place like Mulhouse, which has a TGV station. Okay. It's only something like 20 minutes from Mulhouse station, and you can just arrive and you can just be in Switzerland, and that's so much fun. An interesting thing, did you know that Basel was the home of Switzerland's navy?
I did not know that Switzerland had a navy, so I would have to say no, I did not know that.
Right. Well, my husband takes great pleasure in sharing this little factoid with people because why would Switzerland need a navy? Because it's landlocked, but actually because the Rhine goes through Basel and the Rhine goes into the ocean, that's why they have their little navy presence right there.
Got it. Well, and many people will run into Basel if you do a Rhine River cruise. They either start or end in Basel for those of you who are doing that trip.
Yes, so try and spot the evidence of the Swiss Navy there, I guess. It's just a really lovely Swiss town. The town hall is stunning. It's bright red. It's painted on the outside and has really beautiful, I don't know whether you would call them frescoes, but just painted walls in that town hall there. And it has a really lovely Catholic cathedral, not as grandiose as like the one in Strasbourg, for example, but beautiful. They started building in the year 2019, and it has stunning roof of all different coloured tiles, of which there are several buildings in Basel that has that. So I would definitely encourage a visit to Basel when you are staying in Alsace.
Excellent. One thing we haven't talked about is food. Now, I suspect you and I may be eating different things while we are in Alsace. Are there recommendations that you would make?
Yeah, sure thing. So, yes, I'm sure it's very obvious by now, but I'm passionate vegan, and traditionally Alsace isn't like the most vegan friendly in terms
of... It does not seem to me, yes.
In terms of the current food, the traditional food of the region. However, interestingly, there are quite a few vegan restaurants in the region where you can have things like fondue, and you can have Kugelhof, vegan Kugelhof, Black Forest cake.
Okay, hang on a second. Fondue is vegetarian, but I thought fondue wasn't vegan. Is there a vegan fondue?
Yes. Well, you can make it.
With cashews
vegan
or something
cheese.
like that kind of cheese? Okay,
vegan
got it.
cheese, yeah,
Okay.
yeah. There's a couple of places that will, like our hotel that we stay in, cooks vegan cheese fondue for us, which is lots of fun. And you can get vegan equivalents of Munster cheese, which is really quite uncanny. The taste of it is really interesting. So, yeah, there are some incredible places where you can, as a vegan, enjoy some of those French or Alsatian specialties, but made vegan.
Got it. Okay. I would have to say that I've had vegan cheese and it tasted to me of disappointment, but I suspect that there are better ones out there than I have had. So,
yes, and I have to give full marks to the French in this area. As you can imagine, with a country as obsessed with cheese and quality of food.
We're talking about a country that has a cheese for every day of the week.
Yes.
Literally.
And then some. And then some. But as you can imagine, French vegan chefs and cheesemakers and producers, they have very high standards, and you might be surprised just how incredible the vegan camemberts are, the vegan Munsters, the vegan blue cheeses. I can share a funny story of our driver who takes us around Alsace, our bus driver.
Mm-hmm.
He's not vegan at all, but he eats vegan with us, which of course is lovely. And we give him vegan cheeses. And I think he knows he can be honest with us. But when we gave him a vegan blue cheese that we buy for our travelers, he was just so shocked. He felt that it tasted the same as the non-vegan version. So there are good vegan cheeses out there and getting better every year.
Okay, excellent. As we get to our wrap-up questions, you are standing in the prettiest spot in Alsace.
Oh.
Where are you standing and what are you looking at?
Oh, crikey. Okay. In the main square in Eggisheim.
Okay.
At Christmas time, the beautiful Christmas carols are being played on the loudspeaker, and sometimes there's live carol singers as well. It's just really quiet. There's just people talking in a low voice with their mulled wines. The lighting is so beautiful. Everyone is just so happy. Kids are playing. Everyone's drinking this mulled wine and having spiced nuts and just enjoying the atmosphere. That would be my favorite.
Excellent. And I do have to ask, where are you from originally? You were not from Alsace?
No. No. I grew up in the UK, and then I emigrated to Australia when I was 18, which might explain my accent, perhaps.
No, it did. I didn't explain the accent, but it explained the word crikey.
Right.
I was hearing an English accent, and suddenly you were using Australian words, and I did not know that until that point. Okay,
yes.
That makes perfect sense. And one thing that makes you laugh and say only in Alsace.
Ooh, storks.
Storks. Okay.
Storks. I just love them. Of course, they are in other places in Alsace, but just seeing them and these crazy big nests and flying in and taking off, and it's just makes me. It's not funny, but it just makes me laugh with joy. Let's say that.
Well, and I'd say the big difference there is we've talked about storks in other areas. You can go down to southern Florida and see the storks, but you don't see them in the town, perched on the chimneys traditionally, or on these new structures that will save the chimneys. It's just a very different. I used to ask the question of one way you would know you were only in Alsace. And I think you're right that storks would be an answer to that question as well.
Yes.
Excellent. And if you had to summarize the region in just 3 words, what 3 words would you choose?
Much to see.
Much to see. Excellent. Well, and our guest again has been Brighde Reed from worldvegantravel.com. And normally, Brighde, I ask people what their best post is for a particular region. You actually have a tour that can take people, especially if they're vegan, to this region.
Yes. So I might share with you like our French as a destination page. And then, of course, you will see our trips. And there's lots of resources there about our trips to Paris and Alsace and also the Dordogne as well. And there's lots of links and videos and things like that. So hopefully those will be interesting to your listeners.
Excellent. And if they are interested, we've got an episode on that too, on the Dordogne. So, Brighde, thank you so much for coming on Amateur Traveler and sharing with us your love for Alsace.
Oh, thank you. It was an absolute pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.
I mentioned at the beginning of the show that this is the last version of Amateur Traveler, the last episode, rather, that we'll have. I mentioned at the beginning of the show that this was the last episode that will come out in the iTunes Enhanced format, the AAC format. The biggest problem I ran into is that Apple's just really not supporting it anymore. I was using a version of GarageBand, and that version hasn't been updated in a number of years and isn't supported on the latest version of the operating system. And so it just became more and more of a problem, especially since I started doing a couple episodes ago, or about 4 episodes ago, a version of the MP3 that has the photos and chapters that we were looking for in that version. So we're just going to have the MP3 version going forward, but that also means that anybody who has a player that is capable can see the photos in this episode. So that's something I've been trying to get to for a long time. It's still too much work to create that, and for that reason, I do thank those of you who are supporting the show with Patreon. And thanks to 3 new patrons this week, Randy Rohrer, Nathaniel Meyerpolis, and I'm sure I am butchering that, and also Tom Lorman. And another piece of news, last week I said that I was doing a pay cut at work, and the good news is that I got a 100% raise. I'm now up to a 50% pay cut. So that's good news. But again, thanks for everybody who's been supporting the show with Patreon. In more traditional updates, I heard from Jeff Olfs, friend of the show and patron, who said, just wanted to suggest one addition to the Asheville area, the Cradle of Forestry in the U.S. site. This is where the science of forestry started in America with the first school of forestry. The site is a Vanderbilt legacy. I'll put links in the show notes with more information to that. With that, we're going to end this episode of Amateur Traveler. If you have any questions, send an email to host@amateurtraveler.com, or better yet, leave a comment on this episode at amateurtraveler.com. And thanks so much for listening.